Hi folks, if it's Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a new report that I use the term report loosely. It's just a piece of hysterical propaganda, but because the media, the biggest media outlets in Australia, are giving this headline billing. In fact, it was the headline story a couple of days ago. And still on the headlines today, even so, they're giving it a good push. Is that Australia, or racism in Australia is this is white people being racist against black people, is worse than it's ever been. It's never been this bad ever throughout human history, and non-white people in Australia are suffering as they have never before. I mean, their suffering is just suffering upon suffering. And while white people are living it up easy, all the systems, everything is designed to suit and help and support white people. And every system, every procedure, every process, everything about everything at all levels is designed to oppress and hold back and steal the dignity of non-white people. Now, straight away, you see it's classic Marxist phrasing. So you can, the minute you see that, you know you're dealing with propaganda. But nonetheless, again, it's getting headline billing, and these people are making some sort of a presentation to a parliamentary committee. Now, even to get to talk to these parliamentary committees, you've got to be at sort of the top of the food chain. So now all these non-white people on very substantial salaries and living in the most expensive postcodes in Australia. So we're talking all non-white people living expensive, and they're living in postcodes where it's 99% white. Why would you move there if you're so oppressed and if it's so racist? But anyway, and they've got these very privileged positions, privileged jobs, first-class international travel, 6-star accommodation, sort of lives these people lead, all of them non-white. And they're sitting down talking about how oppressed non-white people are and how non-white people can never get a break. They're not getting to the best jobs. They're not getting the best. What? Are you kidding me? Now, the reality is, of course, that non-white people in Australia have never had it so good. There is pretty much every government institution, every media outlet, advertising on TV, and there are so many affirmative action, diversity, equity, inclusion. There are so many schemes to help and support non-white people, and this help and support is being given at the expense of white people. So to now say it's worse than it's ever been, the oppression is terrible and off the charts, and so on. That's blatant lies. And a series of endless, grotesque untruths. But I took the time to read the report, so you don't have to. Now, it's not a report, it's just a piece of hysterical leftist college kid propaganda nonsense. It's shot through, wherever facts are not available, and I don't think there's any there that I could see, then they just resort to straight out Marxist rhetoric of oppression, and there's no pressure. There's only two sorts of people. There's the oppressed and there's the oppressor. You have to be one or the other, and therefore they can fly with this notion that black people are always oppressed, whether they're oppressed outright, as in they've got nothing to eat, nowhere to live, they can't get water, or is it relative oppression? For example, if the white person has $100 and the black person has $99, then the black person is oppressed. Not actually oppressed, but it's relative oppression. The oppression being that the white person has more, whereas they both should have exactly $100. And until that situation, equity is achieved, then the blacks will always be oppressed. But they're making sweeping statements about every system and every process, access to medical care and these sorts of things. It's all racist. And somehow we're supposed to believe there's a bunch of evil white racists, excuse me, running around making sure that black people can't go to the doctor or something. But they don't give any facts. It's for example, they'll switch to, say, a regional, what in Australia is called the outback, a regional rural area, that's maybe 1,000 kilometres from the nearest village, even let alone a town, and living the original, say, Indigenous Aboriginal lifestyle, and say that these people don't have access to first-class big city medical facilities because they live it. But they don't say it's because they're living that lifestyle out in the middle of nowhere. Are they advocating that a multi-billion-dollar hospital should be delivered into the middle of nowhere where there are 50 people living or 20 people living, or that sort of thing, some small tribe roaming around? Now, also the Indigenous tribes, if they're living the Indigenous lifestyle, they tend to move around quite a bit because they're hunter-gatherers, so they'll move from one area to another. Does that mean there needs to be a mobile multi-billion-dollar hospital that follows them around? Who's going to pay for that? Is denying those people that level of service, is that racist? Is expecting them to go to where the hospital is 1,000 miles away, is that racist? What do you classify as racism? But they don't. They've got no fixed term for racism. They've got a very fluid definition that if these Indigenous Australians want to live in the middle of nowhere, if they don't have access to big city medical facilities, right where they are, then that's racism. If they're expected to go to the city, that's racism. If they're expected to stay in the city to have access to facilities, that's racism. If these people, because they don't have medical access to, because they're in the middle of nowhere, they don't have access to big city medical facilities and they die, that too is racism. So no matter which direction you look in, it always arrives at the racism conclusion. Should these people take any responsibility for themselves? No. That's racism to even expect that. So they don't use facts and evidence, and they just jump around and assert. They have these sort of blanket, very dramatic too, blanket assertions that everything that happens anywhere at any time about anything is somehow racist. How is it racist? Well, they don't have to prove that. They need to merely assert it and say, well, outcomes are different because there are more, relative to population, there are more Indigenous or black people generally, but this particular thing focused on or came back to, it didn't exclusively focus on it, but came back to Indigenous Australian rates of incarceration. And so, well, there's a difference in the outcome, therefore racism. Now, well, maybe they commit more crimes. Well, they're only committing crimes, even if you concede they're committing more crimes, they're only doing it because the white people made them do it because of all the prejudices they have to suffer. So it's still racism. But we gave them jobs and money and this and that. Oh, now you're patronising them, so that's racism. But we give them preference for jobs or this or that. That's racism too because of So they use as many convoluted arguments and sort of representations of ideological positioning that no matter what it is, it always comes back to it's racist. Now, what was, considering that over the last 12 months, and this depends on whose numbers you look at, but over the last 12 months, or last year, I think it was, Australia spent somewhere in the region of $1 billion on diversity, equity, inclusion, and affirmative action programs. That's training and this and that, propaganda and reports and studies and so on. Now, a lot of this would have gone to this money would have been spent on feathering or fattening the pocketbooks of the insiders and the good people and the lesbian academic, and so she can go and live in a waterfront. But there'll be all that sort of patronage going on there. But the amount of money that was spent was truly incredible. Remember, this is $1 billion spent to run around and tell white people how evil they are and how they're all Nazis and fascists and racists and misogynists and whatever. $1 billion fucking dollars spent on that. Now that doesn't include the massive payroll expense of hiring all these affirmative action and diversity, equity, inclusion people, the creating in the public service and the big multinational firms creating all these jobs that aren't needed, aren't wanted, and putting DEI, affirmative action people in those jobs. And I meet them. Sometimes it's beyond cringe embarrassing that people like this have been given jobs. But jobs that they're being brought into Australia en masse to fill jobs that they've got no skills. Okay, there's nothing they've got that they bring to the table, nothing. And so jobs are just being created for them. Because in the days before affirmative action existed, a lot of these people coming in just couldn't get work. They had no qualifications, no recognised qualifications. They couldn't speak English and so on and so forth. So they just couldn't get jobs. So affirmative action programs are brought in, particularly in the public service and the bigger multinationals. And then the government in return was giving juicy, cosy, sweetheart contracts to the bigger firms only on the basis that they would hire all these affirmative action folks. So this report went on. Now, I couldn't find a single, certainly in the ones and I read it pretty much cover to cover. The language is quite hysterical. This idea that Australia is a nuclear level hotbed of racism is a lie. It's a horrible, horrible, grotesque lie. And I don't know why they're allowed to get away with this, why it's reported as fact by the media. As far as apparently Australia is even going to get worse because there's a new mood of far right, the rise of the far right, white supremacist ideology. Wait a minute, what far right, white supremacist? Not explained. It's asserted. It's in a backhanded sort of attempt to draw a parallel or to join some dots here. They're inferring that if Donald Trump wins the US election means that it's it's the literally Hitler type narrative they're pushing, and therefore so anyway they insist here that all white citizens, all citizens must undergo anti-racism training, and all non-white citizens must undergo special training so they can identify racism and so they can combat and fight it. They can crush those Nazis who apparently are everywhere. Under the bed, in the closet, and around the corner. Oh, Nazis everywhere. Now, again, there's no single fact, there's no evidence, and the clumsy, half-assed bullshit attempts at evidence simply point to unequal outcomes. So they're quite happy to draw a parallel between the illiterate black peasant isn't making as much money as the triple PhD hardworking white guy. Therefore, well, that must be racism. There you go. There's the evidence. So it's that level of ridiculous evidence that to whatever extent evidence was put forward. What's interesting here is that these people are being paid handsomely by the taxpayer. They're all activists. They're all radical activists. Their job is to hate white people. Their job is to say how oppressed black people or non-white people are. And again, it's absurd. As you look across the panel, they're all being paid between $500,000 and $1 million a year. And that's before you add the benefits in of the luxury travel and all sorts of other bits and pieces, speaking engagements. The United Nations tosses these people speaking engagements and throws money at them. So these people are they live in some of the wealthiest postcodes in Australia. So these people are so scared of this evil white fascist Nazi racism that they rush to go and live in an all-white, 99.9% white neighbourhood. Why? Because they want to rub shoulders with all the Nazis? This is insane. It shows that they don't believe anything they're saying, that it's all a grift, a massive grift. But this is what they want, that anti-racism training must be made mandatory, but just for white people. Now, there's such communist level, tyrannical. They're the fascists, these people. They run around saying everyone else is a fascist. They're the fascists. Imagine forcing people to undergo ideological indoctrination. It wouldn't be at the point of a gun. It'll just be, hey, you'll never work in this town again, or you can't, you're not allowed to travel on public transport. And, there's numerous things they can do to people, short of pointing a gun at them. So you better do this or else. But the crescendo level, the pitch, the hysteria that's inherent in this report. Now, I don't know if they're going to be. The media is just uncritically putting this forward. These people say that Australia is, wall-to-wall Nazis. Well, it must be true then, because they said it. And so there's no critical examination of any of this. And I haven't seen. There was one quite small cable news network thought it was ludicrous, but apart from that, I haven't seen anybody touching this, examining and critically examining this report. But this just indicates the level of madness that's out there, that if these people ever have their way, then this is what they're going to do. I doubt they'll get across the line with it, but equally, there may be some sort of midpoint that they're offered. Anybody who's accused of maybe not disagreeing with mass migration has to do. You can imagine that it would be tempting to try and use this to reshape the political discourse and suppress any views about discontent over mass migration. But clearly, it's part of the globalist shtick as well. This is what the globalists want: social division along race, gender, and sexuality lines. So these are the fault lines that the globalists want to and are very successfully and very aggressively exploiting. And this is just one more example of that, creating social division. You've been a Tassus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.